themselves openly as Jews to the outside world because for commercial reasons, because they wanted to further their career, okay? This kind of changed in the 70s. And as you know, by the early 80s, we have books like Mouse, which won the Pulitzer Prize. So the floodgates were open for all kinds of Jewish books and Jewish subject matter. In the art world, there's a kind of parallel development, and I'm going to merge them, which is not usual, but for me it's very important, okay? In the mid-century, there was a man named Greenberg who was very big on this thing called formalism, okay? And Greenberg and Rosenberg and the other Jewish critics in New York, they were Jews, right? But they were kind of crypto. Some of them were self-hating Jews. Some of them felt they couldn't really be open about their Judaism. And formalism kind of put the squash on being Jewish, so that many of the abstract expressionists were Jews. They really were. Mark Rothko, Adolf Gottlieb were Jews. Philip Guston was Jewish. They were kind of crypto in their Jewishness. You know, Rothko became a kind of trans substantiationist. You know, did the Houston chapel that looks kind of like a church thing, but looks kind of vaguely romantic. So even though, I mean, he spoke Yiddish, Rothko, all this stuff. So there's all this like very intense Jewish personality traits and kind of quasi-Jewish thinking, but really circumspect, okay? My theory is where comics play an important linchpin is this. In the mid-century, art could only reflect itself, and it was supposed to be totally visual. Cannot be literary, cannot relate to literature, cannot even be poetic in a linguistic way. Could only be purely visual. That's what Clement Greenberg kept on saying about the eyes only. You know what I mean? Now, comics is this very unique kind of synthesis of image and word, okay? And about 1975, the whole structure collapsed, went boom. And we have this thing called postmodernism. In postmodernism, it's this kind of whole melange of words and images, and we have something called identity art and identity politics. And we're still in that era, you know, and it's become so, you know, with Trump and the whole thing, like identity politics is such a thing. But in art, there's a major thing about identity in art, okay? This is the first time in a way that Jews could really come out openly and kind of phrase their artwork in ways that could be read openly as Jewish-based content and subject matter. The prime mover and candidate for that, I think, is comics. I really do. I think comics have this interesting history of being both high and low, being beyond the scope of critical appraisal, endemically had this incredible history that introduced notions of narration, narrativity, and narratology that were unique to comics, but opened up this whole springboard into all the other art forms. And you know, you see the first glimmers of that. So you see, you know, in the comics world, you see people like Kirby and like Will Eisner. To me, they have as much to say to Philip Guston and Kitai, the English artist, because they're both doing the same kinds of things of relating words and images, literature, narrativity that kind of follows in a certain order. You know, comics have this narrative structure that's really engaging and amazing. It projects you into the next panel. It's the only art form, like movies may do that, ancient Egyptian paintings, like, you know, like ancient wall paintings does that kind of thing. In the modern world,
Manga.
Well, manga or comics also. So comics have this language of projecting you to the next frame. That became very important for narrative artists. And I think people like Archie, people like myself, kind of took that vibe and that groove of how narrative works in comics and brought it to a fine art, quote, fine art. Because I don't see any big difference between, quote, fine art and commercial art, you know. The purpose of the show was to show and highlight the connections and correlations between current comic book art dealing with Jewish subject matter and current paintings that deal with Jewish subject matter in the same way. Or, you know, Comic-Con had a theme of Captain America. You know, I made sure to put in a Captain America painting, other things. The purpose of the show was to show that energy, that dynamism that's happening between contemporary Jewish art, which is a kind of, I'd say, 30-year phenomenon. I mean, there's always been Jewish art. But contemporary Jewish art, in a real way, is kind of this new spiral of events. And people who do Jewish comics, it's the same kind of dynamism, the same kind of energy. So I wanted to show those kind of connections, and I think, you know, we've done a good job in showing that. You can see the examples on the wall show that. So, be that as it may, that's kind of like what the show is about. I wrote this down because I want to get all the hits in. And I want to introduce the panel. And we're going to rotate. Each person on the panel is going to talk about what they did in the show and their ideas about these subjects. So the formal topic of the panel is the confluence of Jewish identity, comics, and fine art, right? So, I'd like each person to comment on that. And about 25 minutes into it, when we've all spoken, that we'll talk as a group about it, and then we can open up the floor to some questions, if you'd like, if you have questions about the work in the show. So let me start with, we'll go down in order. Goldie Gross is here, and she's been an incredible help. She's curator on the show with me. She's a member of the Jewish Art Salon. Goldie is a Brooklyn-based artist and curator from Crown Heights. She's curated already 2 shows and associate curator on this show. So in her early 20s, she's already curated like 3 shows. So she's really an incredible person. Invisible True and Natural Instincts were 2 shows that she did. Joshua H. Stulman is curator on the show also, right here. He's creator and publisher. He's kind of an auteur. He's like a lone creator of Israeli Defense Comics. His hero is Magen, Shield of Israel. He's an artist, painter, and curator. He was co-founder of Hadass Gallery, which Simca also has on the end. We'll talk about that. Served the curator between 2010 and 2014. And his latest issue of Israeli Defense Comics debuts on Sunday at Comic-Con. Okay. Next one is noted artist Archie Rand, who, if I may hesitate to say, was kind of my mentor. I've known him since I was at Brooklyn College, if I can say that. Okay. He's on the executive team. This is a long one because he's good and he has a lot of good stuff. Okay. Executive team, Jewish Art Salon. He was the artist at B'nai Yosef Synagogue in Brooklyn, which is where I first saw his artwork as a 17-year-old kid, because that synagogue transformed Jewish art in the mid-70s, like 76 or something. 75. I was a senior in high school. Okay. He's an artist, painter. Oh, sorry, wrong thing. He's had 100 solo exhibitions. He's in the Whitney, the Met, the Modern. He's a winner of the Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship. He's a laureate for the National Foundation for Jewish Culture. He's presidential professor at Brooklyn College. And most importantly for me, he's artist, author of The 613, Blue Rider, Penguin, Random House, 2015. I would hesitate to say here that for my money, this is not a Salon input. For my money, Archie was fundamental in creating the grammar by which contemporary Jewish art is working in America right now. So I would say that. Graphic novelist Julian Bolach is also a founding member and a good guy of the Jewish Art Salon. He's a writer and photographer dealing with Jewish identity. His work has been in the New York Times, Rolling Stone Magazine, Washington Post. His graphic novels include Ghetto Brother, illustrated by Claudia Auerling, and upcoming, this is a really good one, Joe Shuster, the artist behind Superman. Joe Shuster was the artist, and he'll talk about that, but had this horrible life after the Superman story, so it's really interesting that Julian wanted to do a graphic novel about this guy. It's really cool. So that's put out, the artist by Thomas Campy, Super Genius Publishers in 2018. Julian has 2 works in the show that he wrote also. Remembering the Spring with Heinrich Rare, who's here this evening, the artist. And Pittsburgh with Paul Hoppy, who's also here. And those works are downstairs. And then finally, flanking on the right side is, it sounds like a prize fight. Author Rabbi Simcha Weinstein, who's the chair of Pratt Institute Religious Affairs Committee and director of Hadass Gallery, Ross Center. He's a comic book historian and author of Up Up Oy Vey, How Jewish History, Culture, and Values Shaped the Comic Book Superhero, which is Leviathan Press, 2006. He has also written Shtick Shift, Jewish Humor in the 21st Century by Barricade Books, 2008, and is currently working on a graphic novel memoir.